12:56 a.m., the explosion that ripped through a restroom on the third floor of the State Department. No one was hurt by the blast. Police who were summoned to the scene described the bomb as being a big one. About 20 minutes prior to the explosion, a woman who claimed she was speaking for the Weather Underground organization called the Washington Post to say an explosion would occur and added, "Notify the security people there. We don't want anyone hurt."
Speaking of terrorism, a developing story that we're following for you. A verdict in the Dzhokhar Tsarnaev case, the Boston Marathon bombing, is scheduled to be read at 1:45 Eastern Time. We will be following that story. Now, let us continue. There is a generation in America that if you were to say the phrase Weather Underground, they might consider it to be a new cable channel dealing with earthquakes and seismic events. Others understand the real meaning of the phrase, a group that indeed shifted America as Mother Nature could never hope to. The book is entitled Days of Rage, America's Radical Underground, the FBI, and the Forgotten Age of Revolutionary Violence, covering the homegrown revolution of the 1970s. And our guest is the author, Bryan Burrough. Bryan, thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Bryan, I remember a lot of the history. I read a lot of it. And what people don't seem to realize is in the early 70s, they think things are tough right now, but in the early 70s, there were sometimes up to 5 bombings a day going on throughout the country. It's a stunning amount of violence, I think, that people have forgotten in many ways, but maybe they want to forget, don't they?
I don't know quite why we have, but we have. During just 1971 and 1972, the FBI did count 2,500 bombings on U.S. soil, almost 5 a day. It's incredible. And then you had the Black Liberation Army assassinating policemen, the Puerto Rican group, the FALN, bombing restaurants on Wall Street, the kidnapping of Patty Hearst. It went on for over 10 years.
Is it fair to say that as we look at what's happening in the country right now, that if we were to compare the two eras, we would be shocked, certainly in your book it's there, to show people the level of violence, and the fact that the weathermen came out and said we never intended to kill anybody, that in itself is a myth.
Well, there is no violence today to compare to what we witnessed during the 1970s. Whether it was the assassination of policemen or weather bombing of the Pentagon, the Capitol, any number of places. As you point out, the great fallacy about the Weather Underground has always been that they've insisted they never set out to hurt a soul, that in fact they were only engaged in symbolic bombings. In fact, we show in Days of Rage for the first time through on-the-record interviews that in fact what they set out to do and what they attempted to do was to blow up policemen and military officers.
How did we survive that and move forward? Because when it was going full bore at 5 bombings a day, there had to be a point where the FBI, someone, maybe just society itself, was able to finally say enough is enough. What was that point?
Well, it actually, I'm not sure that the government or society made this all go away or defeated it, Ed. It actually kind of ran its course on its own. We see the bombings continue, assassination attempts and kidnappings continue through the 1970s, but they do gradually go down. And I think what happened by and large is those militants, the left-wing militants that went underground and launched these attacks in the early 1970s gradually realized, hey, there is no revolution coming. America is not rising up in support of us, and eventually the violence petered out.
Bryan, can we draw a correlation then to today? Because we have the militant violence, if you will, the religious violence that's out there. Are we looking at the possibility that we're probably going to face the same thing where just what will happen is one day it'll peter out and everything we do is just going to have to wait for that moment?
I'm no expert on Islamic violence or Islamic militantism, but it's hard to see how you defeat that militarily. I think that somehow society and changes in the Middle East will ultimately take care of that, and then it will then peter out. I certainly hope it doesn't take too long.
You've written the book now. It's been a long time since this happened. What about the former members of the Weather Underground? What do they say to you, and what do you hear? Any threats?
Well, no threats. In fact, most of the alumni of the Weather Underground and these other underground groups are in their 60s and their 70s now. Many of them are, in fact, grappling with what they did all the way back then. But this book, Days of Rage, really, I think, could only have been written now because only now are many of them willing to discuss candidly what they did back in the 1970s. These are activities that have been cloaked in secrecy really for decades.
And the interesting things are some of these weathermen have absolutely no remorse about what they did so many years ago, but it is all in the book. I want to remind everybody the book is called Days of Rage, America's Radical Underground, the FBI, and the Forgotten Age age of revolutionary violence. I studied a lot of this. I followed a lot of this. I watched a lot of it. I am really going to be interested to read this book and learn a whole lot more. Thank you so much for your time. Good luck with the book, Bryan.
Thank you very much.
All right, a story close to my heart, how one group is helping veterans and animals in need at the same time. We hope to bring you that story. We are also following the fact that a decision has been reached in the Boston Marathon trial. We'll bring you this all when MidPoint continues.